Welcome back. So, yes, this is the study that we've been talking about for a couple of days now, the fact study. This is the press conference, sorry, called by the CAQ government. Jean-François Robert is the French language minister announcing a 21-point, what he calls, action plan. It involves 600 and some odd million dollars to be spent over 5 years. Look, beyond, and I asked you this to start the show, beyond how this money is being spent, and there's some good things I think in it. Obviously, when you hire teachers to help, teach French, that's great. It maybe makes things go a little quicker too. From what I hear, it's sometimes difficult for people to even get into these classes, to learn French, even if they want to. But Jack Jedwab from the association, or president rather, of the Association for Canadian Studies is on the line. Jack, my interest in this is the disconnect, if you will, between what Jean-François Robert cited from Stats Canada study versus what the government's own OQLF cited in their study. So can we start with that?
Yeah, I mean, they're referring to the Stats Canada census results on the language used in the workplace, where it did show somewhat of a shift from the use of French only to more bilingualism. Again, not a massive shift, but enough of a shift that the government could sort of draw attention to that to justify the action plan or aspects of that action plan, versus the study that came out 2 weeks ago, which was done by the government arm, if you like, in terms of the French language protection. And it suggested that over more than a decade, we've seen stability in the use of the French language in public. That is, the public use of the French language has been relatively stable. So, yeah, there does seem to be a contradiction. There are different methodologies associated with it, and clearly the government's going to use whichever data is best positioned to justify whatever action they choose to take.
All right, so you make a living breaking down data. I'd like your take on this. The OQLF data suggests, and I want to make sure I have this right, Jack, that for all intents and purposes, in the public sphere, French really hasn't changed a whole lot in the last, I'm going to say, 10 or 15 years. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's what their data is suggesting. But again, there are different methodologies, right? So in the StatsCan data, in terms of language used in the workplace, they're going to ask you whether you're using French only, French and English, English only, French most of the time. It's sort of 5, 6 options. And if you blend at all and say it's mostly French, then it'll be construed as mostly French plus some English. So it gets into those gradations, if you like, in terms of their approach to things. The OQLF methodology is a different methodology in terms of the extent to which, or percentage, time in which you're using French in public sphere, or so forth. So not with those categories, if you'd like.
Is it fair to ask you then, if you've seen both, what's your takeaway from these? Do you sense that French is in decline, as the government keeps telling us, and what does that mean?
I sense that there's probably some evolution in the extent to which people are using both languages in the workplace. So it's hard to suggest that they're displacing French with English. It's more about the, if you like, gradations, as I call it. It's sort of a little, they're using French, say, instead of 80% of the time, 75% of the time, and that means 5% increase in the extent to which they're using English, if you'd like, in that sort of pocket or sector in which the thing is being measured. So they're gradations. They're not massive changes. But the way in which the messaging is done in Quebec, any small change, any shift could appear to be free fall. Right? So, and that's what, the government has been stressing very often in the sort of mixed message that it gives when it suits its purpose. And it's not just this government. It's previous governments have done the same thing, and influencers have done this as well. So,
all right. I mean, free fall is a pretty scary word, when you suggest that things are that drastic that we're looking at something that you described it as free fall. Is that what you believe is coming from this?
No, not at all. I think that, again, as I said, it's messaging that's being given by influencers in Quebec and by governments, not just this one, but previous governments, where there's value in preying on the insecurity that Francophones feel about the future of the French language, and opportunity there politically to score points. But I think that to some degree in this particular case, the CAQ has hurt itself a bit by using that mixed message, saying on the one hand, French is in free fall, and the Premier's given sort of messaging like that to some degree, to the point where it almost looks like the government's ineffective in doing anything about it when the government's in power over a certain number of years, right? If it continues to hammer away that same message, and and puts in all these measures that are not changing that particular way of looking at it. It looks like the government itself is not being effective in terms of trying to remedy the situation that they've described as bordering on apocalyptic.
Okay. These are great words, by the way. Look, my question, I guess, would also concern this whole idea, and I know we've talked about this before, the government's concern with mother tongue. In other words, the language being spoken at home. They actually cite figures for that, and I think a lot of people are scared off by that. I mean, that seems really, as some would say, not to be any of the government's business. So why is that an issue here?
Well, the issue is that the government has, and again, not just this government, previous governments have continued to try to construe the issue as the percentage of people who are francophones in Quebec, more specifically in Montreal. As you've got immigration coming here, and immigration is the main driver of our population growth, and most of that immigration is allophone, that is to say, neither English nor French. Even if they speak French, their first language, their mother tongue, as we say, will be something other than English or French. So what the government has done, and as have analysts and others, is that they will bring together, if you'd like, or accumulate the Anglophones and the allophones into one group, non-Francophones. I don't know about you, Aaron. I've never been invited to a meeting of non-Francophones in my life, incidentally. I just want to mention that. So they pack them into one group, present the data that way. So, yeah. And then they'll say Francophones are a minority and increasingly a minority on the island. Hence, we can't integrate that non-Francophone group, which consists of, say, 15, 20% Anglophone and 25 other groups, right? But they'll position themselves as a minority and continue again to emphasize that over and over and over again. And of course, that's not going to change because immigration that comes here is going to be heavily neither English nor French, but these people learn French. Hence, 95% of the population is able to speak French. But that's not the criteria that the government is going to use to measure the progress of French. They're going to continue to use this criteria, which they can use indefinitely, as a way to continue to insist that French is in decline or worse in Montreal. Now, when we get into it, we're talking about the island of Montreal, the Montreal metropolitan region, because the percentages will vary as well, right? But they'll probably use the island more often because that's where it makes the case best for highlighting the threat to French when it's constructed on the basis of mother tongue, if you like, that language identifier.
The threat to French, that word, the threat. Jack, we're out of time. I thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I hope it helps.
It does. Well, it opens people's eyes up, I hope. Jack Jedwab from the Association for Canadian Studies. We'll take our break. Jason has your news next.